Foundation's Edge was a radical departure from the preceding books in the Foundation series, a very large work devoted to a single conflict, but one with multiple plots coming together within. But it still did fit in the overall political conflict approach of the rest of Foundation. The first stories were all about the approach of a crisis that could stop the development of the galaxy towards a better place. Failure wasn't just bad for our heroes. The totality of humanity, including the ones who were getting in the way, would suffer as a result. Foundation's Edge just gave us multiple crises, the first Foundation's crisis being the threat posed by the manipulation of the second Foundation. The second Foundation's crisis being the threat posed by the manipulation of Gaia. The Gaian crisis that the first Foundation's mind-shielding technology would thwart their goal of Galaxia. Trevise's decision was to resolve one, and only one crisis, and hope that it was correct and not one of the other two. Foundation and Earth now goes off in a completely different direction. Oh, it continues using the same characters, and continues on from plot points dropped in Foundation's Edge, but the only crises faced are personal ones that they stumble into. The only possible effect on the galaxy is if Trevise tells Gaia that he has changed his mind. This change isn't too surprising, though. The book Asimov had written before, Robots and Empire, was the final volume of the robot novels, as they're called, which moved the focus of the series to R. Daniel Oliva as the protagonist over the now-dead Elijah Bailey, and rather than being a murder mystery, is about a spacer conspiracy. The two robots, Daniel, who looks human, and Giscard, who does not but has mental powers, face this with the problem that the three laws inhibit any effort on their part to become involved, until they conceive of the Zeroth Law, as they call it, that the first duty of a robot should be to protect humanity as a whole, that the other laws bend to it, and therefore, if a human is doing something that threatens the future of humanity, that human can't order them not to interfere, because the second law, obey all orders, would be conflicting with the Zeroth Law. I won't spoil the book for you, just say that in the end, Daniel acquires mental powers. But as you can see from that, the idea of Gaia in Foundation's Edge fits in nicely. With the Zeroth Law, a robot must not harm humanity, or through inaction allow humanity to come to harm, overriding the first law which prohibits harm to humans. It means that a robot could kill a human if doing so would avert greater harm to the human race. Gaia applies the same thinking. Any individual within Gaia may be sacrificed if judged necessary by the greater whole. Anyway, so what we have with Foundation and Earth is often chided as Asimov's travelogue approach. Trevise is disturbed by his decision to choose Galaxia over the Selden plan, and can't help but think this is related to the disappearance of Earth from all records in recent centuries. He plans to go searching for it, and is joined by Pellerat and Bliss, who by now are a couple and quite devoted to each other. The starting point is the world Comparelian, which has been mentioned as being one of the oldest worlds in Foundation's Edge. It is in fact in the Foundation era's name for Bailey's world, the first settler world from the robot novels. That, in fact, is almost the entirety of what this story is, a whatever happened to of the settings from this period. Aurora, Solaria, Earth, and its descendants are the places that are visited as well. On Comparelian, this ship is seized by the transportation minister, forcing Trevise to find a way to recover it, which he finally does thanks to two things: her superstitious fear of Earth, and that he gives her a good boning. Much discussion is made of breasts in this book, but not to worry, Asimov does stop to remind us that Bliss has a ghetto booty, though none of that can compare to his clinical explanation of why the giant buxom minister would want to be dominated in bed. But aside of that, she points the way to a local expert on myths who tells the legend of the Spacers, and provides the coordinates that they think are for 3 Spacer worlds, and thus their quest is on. Aurora, their first stop, is devoid of humans. The stations are surprisingly still in orbit, but they're empty. But the trio does run into a pack of feral dogs which they have to deal with before leaving the planet. The second stop is on Solaria. In Robots and Empire, the Solarians, who are always reclusive, seem to have all but disappeared. We now learn that their civilization is alive and well, more or less. Bander, the one that they come across, is amused by their presence, It seems now that their distaste of being in the presence of others no longer extends to human beings, because the Solarians have so changed their genetic structure that to Bander, talking to these visitors is like talking to a sapient dog, an amusing diversion and hardly the same as talking to one of Bander's neighbors. The Solarians had disappeared into gigantic underground mansions and own estates of 40,000 square miles, seeing this as the ultimate liberty. They are no longer male nor female. They have changed themselves to produce both the sperm and egg for their own reproduction. But more amazingly, they have created new parts of the brain, transducer lobes located behind the ear, that are capable of redirecting energy to accomplish work, and so skillfully that Bander can power the entire estate, including the robots, even while not thinking about it, even while sleeping. But while all of this was an interesting diversion, the penalty for landing on Solaria is death. You know how it is, can't afford to be soft on crime. A Solarian plans to fry their brains, so Bliss uses the power of Gaia to try to block the energy, but unwittingly lets it build up until it burns out Bander's own brain, which leaves Bliss in a bit of a state since Gaia was based on the laws of robotics applied to life as a whole, so killing's kind of a bad thing. On their way out, they stumble across Bander's heir, Phalum, who's heartbroken about her robot parent shutting down. After what happened, Bliss insists that they take her. They insist on referring to Phalum with feminine pronouns, so I will do the same. Especially when Guardian robots show up stating that Phalum will certainly be executed since she's too young to take over the estate and there's already a surplus of children on the world. Trevize is the W.C. Fields of space, though, and despises the kid and worries that she's going to start messing with things on the very advanced and delicate ship. Their next stop is the final spacer world, one that we've never encountered. Not that it matters because it's also empty and is virtually stripped of its atmosphere by now. Plus there's a rather dangerous moss about the place. But it provides the coordinates of all the spacer worlds, and from that they can try to extrapolate the position of Earth, since the worlds would probably be as close as possible to the planet of origin. The world at the center is Alpha, as in Alpha Centauri, the final settlement of those humans who had refused to leave Earth and colonize the galaxy, now forced to colonize this terraformed world. This place is almost all ocean and seems quite primitive in all respects save two: advanced weather control and biological science. There Trevize sleeps with another woman who gives him a fatal STD, and what's worse, once he's infected it will spread to the others without his needing to, It's their way of handling unwanted visitors. Luckily, Phalum's musical ability and Trevize's sexual magnetism convinces her to send them away before the final step is taken to make the virus active and kill them. It still would have been easier to wear a space condom, I'm sure. The final stop is indeed our solar system, where they find out that Earth is radioactive now. No one can go there even in spacesuits for long before they'd be fatally exposed. But thanks to Phalum screwing with the ship, Trevize realizes that the references to Earth were removed not to protect the dead world, but to protect the moon, which is indeed occupied. The occupant, it turns out, is Daniil, still alive 20,000 years later and having used his mental powers to try to guide the events of human development, including the creation of psychohistory and Gaia. But now he's dying. He's at the point where he can't create an even more sophisticated brain than the one he already has, so he plans to merge his mind with Trevize. Trevize naturally says hell no to that idea, so instead Daniil plans to merge with Phalum, who is excited because she seems to think of him as her robot parent brought back. And Trevize reveals his reasoning behind choosing Gaia, the assumption in psychohistory that is flawed. It assumes that the only force on the galaxy will be humanity. What will happen if aliens show up? So because of aliens, Galaxia is necessary for the good of the human race, and with that, Asimov presents the chronological end of his history of the future. The biggest problem with this story is that it's an adventure tale minus the adventure. Well, it's fairly limited at any rate, and it doesn't play to Asimov's strengths as a storyteller. As a result, you get the Asimov version of, oh, the places you'll go, stretched out to 2.25 times the length of The End of Eternity. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that this be an action tale, but rather that it seems to find excess joy in revisiting these past places rather than making the places themselves interesting. Solaria is the exception, as it again plays to Asimov's strengths. Fantastic ideas on display, labyrinthine tunnels, and robots. In between is a lot of talk about Earth and about Gaia, a lot of arguments and counter-arguments for Galaxia. Foundation and Earth presents a lot more characterization than previously, though, although some of that still struggles. The kid really brings out Trevise's more dickish side, and Bliss seems absolutely obsessed with Trevise's sex life, despite the fact that she is quite open about sex herself. She also goes on about extramarital affairs, once she learns exactly what they are, about the sign of a collapsing society that they must represent, while Trevise dismisses them as a rule made to be broken, and men have a mutual understanding about that. Asimov himself was actually notorious for having several affairs during his first marriage, so I think that might have had something to do with that. The idea of robots existing throughout settler history but behind the scenes, while at the same time robots never being recreated, is interesting. The idea for creating a simulacrum is one far older than robots, and the idea that we would never again retread that ground would seem puzzling. Obviously, an anti-robot stigma would have been unlikely to last more than a few centuries after the fall of the Spacers, and someone might consider doing it again independently. However, if robots were among us, following the Zeroth Law, there would be a twofold reason for them to see that any such efforts ended in failure. First, because any attempt would be starting from scratch, and thus new robots would not be constructed with the 3 laws, and thus could become a threat to humanity. Now, of course, the robots could ensure that these new robots would be built along the lines of the 3 laws, but that's why there's reason number 2. Robot servants were likely a significant cause for the Spacer downfall. There's a subtle hint on Melpomene when they find the collection of worlds that they're in a 7x7 grid, with Solaria being added at the end as if its existence was unexpected. The Spacer worlds had reached a point of stagnation so obvious that even they didn't expect further expansion. Given what we see of Aurora and the later knowledge that its people didn't all die out, it doesn't look like there was any kind of natural disaster responsible. I think it's likely that something happened related to their robots that forced them to abandon their world, that it depended so much on them that a major disruption of robotic activity was an apocalyptic event. Knowing of how robots likely led directly or indirectly to the fall of these civilizations, robots would then assume that from the Zeroth Law that rediscovering them would not be in humanity's interest. But back to the story itself. Asimov did come up with a variety of places to visit. There are minimal repetitions between them and the things that they had to face. But ultimately, it felt like the driving plot was a thinly veiled excuse for the trip, and that the potential of many was underexplored. Yeah, I know, paradoxically it's both too long and not long enough. The revelation at the end, the discovery of Earth, the reason for its hiding, the reason for Trevise's choice, and the arrival of Daniil within this future era, had only 1 out of 4 that was really satisfactory, the last one, and that's only if you were a follower of the robot novels. Foundation and Earth isn't bad, though. Some of the ideas are certainly engaging, and the character dynamics add some interest. But as the cap to the Foundation and the last chapter of Asimov's History of the Future, it is disappointing. It provides a setup for a continuation that would never be written, Asimov's wife stating that he didn't know what to do with the next part despite that. Instead, Asimov would go in another direction and write 2 prequel novels for Foundation before his death. But before we can get into that, it's really about time we talk about Gaia and the Decision, which I'll be doing in our next part.